Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the City of Alameda Mayor's Town Hall. I'm Sarah Henry, the city's Public Information Officer. Joining us today to talk about the state's immediate relief package is State Senator Nancy Skinner. Please note that all participants have been muted. To submit a question for the mayor or for Senator Skinner, please use the chat feature. All of our town halls are recorded and are available on the city's website and on our YouTube channel. I'd now like to turn today's town hall over to Mayor Marilyn Ezzy Ashcraft.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited. We have a special honored guest, and we are honored to have this special guest with us. Our very own State Senator Nancy Skinner is joining us today because there's some really important relief legislation. The legislature just passed that she had a large role to play in, and I want her to tell you about it and later take your questions. But let me just tell you a little bit about Senator Skinner. She has served in the state Senate since 2016, and prior to that, served 3 terms in the state assembly. In the Senate, Senator Skinner currently serves on 8 committees and chairs the Public Safety Committee and the Public Safety Budget Committee. Senator Skinner started her career in public service in 1984 as the first and only student. She was a grad student at Cal at the time to be elected to the City of Berkeley City Council. And I can remember her on the East Bay Regional Parks District. This woman brings with her just a career of public service. Ever since starting in public service, Senator Skinner has been a champion for the environment, climate protection, social justice, addressing the housing crisis, something near and dear to my heart, criminal justice reform, gun violence prevention, and so much more. It is with great honor and pleasure that I introduce to you our State Senator Nancy Skinner. Senator Skinner, welcome to Alameda. Thank you so much for making time in your busy schedule to be here.
Mayor Ashcraft, you're quite welcome. Very glad to be here and happy to both provide some information to your constituents and my constituents about actions the state's recently taken, and then of course answer questions. So a couple things. We passed now I think 2 weeks ago what the governors refers to as the Golden State Stimulus. And that is state-specific money that is being directed to our most low-income households. And when I say most low-income households, I'm talking about even folks who 2 years ago weren't low-income, but then with the pandemic lost a job, or maybe their small business was pretty much shuttered. And so they really have dropped in income. And they may or may not have received, robust unemployment. Not everyone is eligible for unemployment. Many were with the pandemic unemployment benefits that the Congress approved, but still, there's folks that have really seen a drop in their incomes due to the pandemic, and they're still supporting their households. And it's really hard. It's really, really tricky. I mean, from any of us who interact with, for example, our food banks, know that their demand is at an all-time high. Our schools have providing extra meals. Fortunately, the federal government allowed, in the pandemic relief, they allowed schools to provide meals regardless of whether the child had previously qualified for free and reduced lunch. So basically any family that showed up could get meals from the school district. And some of our school sites are even providing meals for the whole family. So we know that a lot of people are really hurting due to this pandemic, and people that weren't low income before, as well as people that already were had very income challenges. So that Golden State Stimulus, what it does is California has its own earned income tax program, California Earned Income Tax. The federal government also has an earned income tax, which is eligible, like even if you only were able to work for a very minimum amount in a year, just, maybe even just a few weeks in that year, and had, in other words, got only income for a few weeks from a W-2. Then if you qualify for the California Earned Income Tax Credit, And maybe you didn't qualify in 2019, but you qualify now in 2020. You file your taxes, and in addition to whatever federal earned income tax credit you might receive and the normal California earned income tax credit, you would get on top of that an additional $600 from the state of California. So that's under the earned income tax credit. And we also broadened now, even some single individuals, the earned income tax credit historically has only been for folks with families. There's now some capability for even adults without children, but you can just file your taxes. And if you qualify for it, you will get that additional $600. Now, we also have added $600 directly to those residents who are living entirely on SSI income, those residents who are in the CalWorks program, and that's our lowest income households, and for those folks who are living on disability. So that is the $600 stimulus. And then additionally, there is a category of taxpayers who do not have Social Security numbers, but file taxes under what's called the I-10. And those individuals did not benefit from any federal stimulus. So in other words, last year, many of us got a $1,200 check, and then we later got another check when it was passed in December, but the I-10 filers got nothing. And so California is now, with this Golden State stimulus, I-10 filers of up to $75,000 in income will get a $600 check, $600 from state of California. We also expanded, if you're a small business owner, many of you probably were aware that back in December, the Governor Newsom opened up a $500 million, so $500 million program of grants to small businesses. And that was so oversubscribed. There were some 350,000 more applications than we had funds for. So in the same action that we took that awarded the Golden State stimulus, this $600 payments that I referred to, it also put $2 billion more dollars into the Small Business Grant Fund. And if you had already applied to that small business grant and you didn't get the funds, you don't have to reapply, you're eligible. It doesn't guarantee that you'll receive it, but it means you don't have to reapply. If you hadn't applied, then apply now. They just opened up the round again. And women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, very small businesses are given preference, but also our cultural institutions. So let's say you're a music venue and you've never been open this time period. And the Small Business Grant Program had a cap on how much revenue. Well, some of our small theater companies, music venues, other things that have never been open, museums, they may have received higher revenue than the small business cap. So we lifted the revenue cap for the cultural entities. It's still a modest grant. It's a $25,000 grant. However, you don't have to meet that revenue cap, but you just have to show your losses, your revenue losses, and it's based on your revenue losses. And many of our cultural institutions, whether it's like a live music venue, a dance, say company, a stage theater or something, they have had no revenue at all this year. So we wanted to make sure that they would qualify for this $2 billion more in small business grants that we provided. And we are also next week looking at some issues for tax conformity, for a level of tax conformity for any businesses that received paycheck protection loans. So we'll be acting on that sometime next week. That's still being discussed. Those are our main stimulus actions. We also passed, and the governor signed today, the bill that would provide funding to our school districts to allow more. Some of our school districts already are providing in limited numbers in classroom instruction, but this will provide more funding for school districts to expand in classroom instruction. And I certainly can go into detail on that if anyone has a question related to that.
I think school reopening is a big topic here in Alameda. So when you can get back to that, please do.
Okay.
Thanks.
So let me just, well, I can jump right into that right now.
Sure.
So let me talk about that one. All right. So, this is one of these classic subject matters that's very emotional for most of us because if our children, many of them, not all, some of the kids are thriving with what they call Zoom school, though most are not. Most are not thriving with that. And they really want the interactions with their peers. They want to be back in the classroom. They want that kind of stability. And yet at the same time, as many families that want their kids back in the classroom right now, there are many families that are still worried. They're still concerned. It's not safe. And maybe that family maybe they have an intergenerational household and they have people at risk and they're afraid if their child goes to school that even if the child doesn't get COVID, they could become an asymptomatic carrier and then someone in the household could get COVID. So the virus is still present, very present in our communities. And as much as caseloads are going down, meaning the number of people that are infected with COVID, we're also finding that less people are testing. And we also have more, some variants that are more contagious. So we're not out of the woods. The pandemic is still here. And we have to design a plan, and this is why it took a while, that really met the needs and the legitimate concerns of everyone, of communities, of families, of school staff, of teachers, and that recognized that all of our schools are not the same. If you look at like CDC guidelines, they're like, oh, well, schools are, get kids back in classroom. On the other hand, they also say optimal for it to have really good ventilation, the classroom, windows that can open, and a whole variety of things that we know. Go to any school and walk around. Not all classrooms have windows that open. Not all school sites have great ventilation systems or any ventilation system. That's the reality. So we had to design a plan that really emphasized safety and was flexible to recognize that all the school sites are not the same and that the level of COVID in every community is not the same. And we fortunately, I think, did that. We landed there. And we also gave a path for our school personnel, staff, teachers, you name it, to be able to get vaccines. It's not a requirement. They don't have to be vaccinated in order to get back in the classroom, but there's a pathway now for them to get vaccinated. And all of our counties have allowed educators in the vaccine eligibility, and the governor has set aside 10% of vaccine supply for school personnel, which is a great thing, and childcare personnel. So that will give those families who've been hesitant, hopefully a little more assurance that their child going back in the classroom, it will be safe. And it will give those schools and the school personnel a little more assurance that it's safe for them to get back in the classroom too. And the money that we're providing is providing the school districts money for testing, for shielding, for masks, for all kinds of things that are needed in order to make the school site safe. So it was passed. The governor signed it into law this morning. And I think we're going to see a lot more classrooms open. Some school districts may still choose not to, and they have that right. They will not get to advantage the money that's going to provide for in-classroom instruction. They won't get to take advantage of that, but those that choose to, and most of them will get those funds and will be able to open. So we'll stop there and take questions.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great summary. Good to know. And I'm wondering, Senator, does the funding that's been made available in this legislation apply to funds that have already been expended? Because I know, for example, in Alameda, the Alameda Unified School District has been working really hard over the last couple months to improve ventilation, to put the necessary procedures in place. They've
Right.
started testing. So how does that work?
Yes, we put it in there where we didn't use the words retroactive, but definitely if schools have already been making expenditures to improve their safety related to the pandemic and to have in-person instruction, they can use that funding for that purpose. Yes.
That is good to know. Thank you. I know we've got some questions that have come in. I've got a couple that I jotted down, and we also know that Senator Skinner has a hard stop to get to another meeting at 1 p.m. I'm just so thrilled to have you here. And so we're going to just move things along. So Sarah, let's go over to you for questions.
Great. So I just have a few, and folks are encouraged to continue to enter questions into the chat, and we can get through them. We also have people asking questions on Facebook Live, so both of those work. The first question, this person says, 2 months ago, we filed for the small business grant. They filled out the paperwork for the small business grant, and they were put into the second round. They have not been notified that they've received the second round grant. So are they still in the system for the grant, or should they be looking for one of the new programs?
If they are a cultural institution, they could choose to reapply under that particular, because it was a set aside of money. They could also leave their application with, as is, and it's still being considered. If they are just a small business and not a cultural institution, they do not have to reapply. And this new round of funding, they've probably only in the last week or two started to vet those. Okay. So the fact that you haven't heard yet whether you're awarded or not awarded is not unusual, but that process is now underway.
Okay, great.
Okay.
And I want to just, if my staff who are also monitoring this, if there's any specific update to what I'm reporting, I would be happy for you to put it in the chat to me or jump in and express it.
Yeah, and they've been putting links into the chat for everybody too, which is wonderful. And I've been copying those over to Facebook, so we're covered. The next question asks, for the Golden State stimulus, do I just do this when I fill out my taxes?
Yes, unless if you're a CalWORKS recipient or a person on SSI, then you will just get it automatically. It is not related to your filing of your taxes. And if you are someone who is eligible for the earned income tax credit, and again, even if you weren't eligible in 2019, so you can look up what that eligibility is, you're eligible now because of what you faced in 2020, then file your taxes and you can potentially receive not only the federal EITC, but the normal California EITC plus the $600 additional Golden State stimulus.
Great. So somebody's posted and they've said, today, a group of families that has been advocating for a return to school announced that they're holding a Celebrate and Encourage AUSD Reopening with Alameda Families for Schools reopening outdoor event on March 13th at Cruzy Park. This person says that this not only seems like a bad idea, but outdoor gatherings are not allowed under current guidelines. And so they're asking what can be done about this.
Well, I'm not sure what the state senator can do about it. As mayor, I would encourage people to keep doing what you've been doing, which is to wear your masks and avoid those large gatherings, even outside. I mean, truly, if everybody could be 6 feet apart, except we're still not supposed to mix more than 3 households, as I recall. So you're absolutely correct, Senator, that this is a very emotional issue, schools reopening. But I want our schools to reopen. I want our businesses to be able to reopen. And we're so close in Alameda County. We're in the purple tier, but we're like this close. We just need to hold our numbers for another week and we go red, which is just great. So please don't do things that would jeopardize that standing. That was a very interesting point you made, Senator, that while our case rates are declining, people aren't going in for testing in such large numbers either. Yeah, I will say though that we are so blessed to have the Oakland Coliseum megapod just over the bridge at the Oakland Coliseum because that has enabled a lot of our teachers, I know, because they share on social media, have gotten their vaccines there, and it just makes it really convenient for the other people who are eligible. And you know what? I'm going to slip in a question of my own. If you have a opportunity to chat with Dr. Mark Ghali, our at the public health department. It the eligibility categories do not currently include transit operators.
Right.
Now, over in San Francisco, Mayor London Breed found an exception, declared an emergency. However, she did it. I don't have those special powers because I don't have a public health department, but I did sign a letter that was originated by Supervisor David Halbert, Alameda County Supervisor David Halbert, and I asked the other members of the Alameda County Mayor's Conference. I'm president this year. I asked my other fellow mayors to please sign a letter to the Board of Supervisors asking them to please include transit workers, our AC transit drivers, our BART operators that have been working all through the pandemic, and we really feel should be qualified to get their vaccines now as well. Anything you can do or add to the
Well, what I
conversation?
find interesting about that is for the supervisor himself to initiate a letter when the county does have some latitude in this regard.
Okay.
And it's in terms of defining essential workers. And so, I think it would be worth it for him to return to his discussions with the county public health department. And
Okay.
because obviously if Mayor Breed, who is a city and a county, has the ability to do that, then Alameda County would similarly. There's no difference between them. I think that Colleen
Chala.
Yeah.
responded just recently. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it in my inbox fast enough on that. And I don't remember what her response was, but yeah.
Sarah, did we get anything from
No, but
Director Chalda?
I heard something this week also that that they were still not being considered essential workers. But not I didn't hear any explanation.
Which seems really insane because they are. I mean, look, the essential workers are those that are public facing and must. I mean, why a transit operator, transit driver would not be any more than a grocery clerk? It's that just seems really odd.
It does.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it just seems odd. So
well, and then there's this little exception that was made for if you're an AC transit bus driver whose route goes to the Coliseum station where people
there you are.
Then you can get your vaccine. Hello. I want to break in with a little news flash. I've got good news, and boy, can we use good news here. The Alameda Teachers Union, Alameda Education Association, approved the tentative agreement to go back to in-person instruction for, Sarah, help me out, K through 5
elementary.
And they passed it quite overwhelmingly, I will just add. So that is wonderful. It was agreed upon by the district negotiators and the president of the union last Friday, but then the teachers had the next 5 business days to ratify, and they did. So that's great.
It's really exciting. All of us elementary student parents yesterday, the cohorts were announced. So you could log on to your areas and see if you were in the A cohort or the B cohort if you go to school Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday. So it's a very exciting time for everybody.
Very exciting. So maybe we could cancel that gathering at Cruzy Park, just saying. Okay, more questions, Sarah.
One more question. I was going to add also, Mayor, that even when we go into the red tier, what you said about the 3 households stays. So that was at a purple tier, but it continues into the red tier that no more than 3 households should be gathering, even in the red tier, that restriction. The next question for the senator, this person says that they assume local nonprofit organizations, arts organizations in particular, like Rhythmics Cultural Works here, would qualify for funds, but do they go to the same site as for the small businesses, or how do they go about doing that?
Yes, they go to the same site, but they will find and they have the option, they can apply to the normal small business one or to the 50 million set aside
Oh,
or the
okay.
cultural institutions. And yes, definitely, Rhythmix is exactly the type of entity that this was designed for.
Such good news. Thank you.
That is the last question that I've
Oh,
got. So I don't
well,
know if folks
the,
want to keep
the
chatting,
mayor,
but
the mayor has a couple.
yes.
There is a budget surplus. We brought in more. I guess it was the personal income tax. Is that it?
Yes,
Then
it's because the stock market was so high. And the capital gains, so those individuals who made a lot of money in the stock market last year, which there are some who did. So our excess revenue this year is really from I say a handful. It's from a very small percent of Californians, maybe 1% of Californians, as they caught, who provided us so much more money because they made money. Well, meanwhile, we know so many other Californians are unemployed or really hurting. But yes, we had excess revenue.
big disparities. So what are some of your priorities for where you would like to see that surplus?
Well, we've been using it already. The Golden State Stimulus is, we used those one-time only funds for that. We used one-time only funds for the 2 billion additional that we added to the small business grants. We have approved a couple of other things with it, but we'll probably use some of the one-time only monies for some wildfire prevention work, protection work. And then I think that it's very, very important to maximize our purchase of properties, existing residential properties that can be used to house our folks that are unhoused right now. And the Project Home Key was supporting counties and cities to buy, for example, motels or other, a dormitory at the former California College of the Arts and Crafts was purchased by the city of Oakland, and is being converted to low-income housing. Yes. And so, but I think that we really, given that it's very hard, it's expensive to try to build it. It's long time and expensive to, find a site, get a permit, and newly construct housing for very low end. We can buy up some properties to house our unsheltered folks, the better. So I think we should put a significant amount towards that. That discussion we're not there yet, but I hope that we do.
I'm ready to support you because we have a property in Alameda that made it to the short list, but the funds ran out before they could get down to our property. And yeah, I think that's so important.
And some, yes.
Yeah, no.
Well, some folks may have seen, there's an article in the SF Chronicle that San Francisco is spending like $61,000 per site.
Tent.
Yes.
For tent per year.
Per tent per year. Right. And that is more than what it would cost to cover the rent. And now it is harder to go and find rental spots we have a housing shortage. But if there are properties like that dormitory or the, I'm assuming motel, for example, that City of Alameda identified, properties like that, we want to grab them and grab them now. And the other thing that's, I think, very important for us to remind ourselves and to know that the research and the homeless counts show that our unsheltered people, they are long-term residents. They have been our neighbors for years, and most of them are only recently unhoused. It is only a very small percent of these folks that have been homeless for a long time. Most of them are recently unhoused. And the biggest change is people age 50 and older, especially, unfortunately, our African-American population, 50 and older, that had jobs, that always had a home, and then, they don't have retirement security. Various things happen, like this pandemic, and next thing you know, they are literally out there in a car, living in a car, or living in an encampment. And we need to provide real secure housing as much as we can possibly do so. And I want to be able to take advantage of the money and buy some properties.
You're speaking my language. And I was just in a meeting recently And the topic was, when these eviction protections at some point come to an end, if we're not careful and if we don't have programs and additional available funding in place, more people will slip into homelessness. And we need to also prevent people from slipping into homelessness, not just address those that we have. And Sarah's got a couple more questions that we'll try to squeeze in before the senator has to dash to her next meeting. What have you got, Sarah?
It's very on topic. So this next person says, thank you to State Senator Skinner for your leadership statewide. Can you speak to building back better and more equitably through your support of SB 16, 81, 82, and 354, the peace officer release of records, sentencing, dismissal of enhancements, petty theft, and foster youth relative placement?
All right, I appreciate that the person who wrote in knows all my bill numbers, because when you've been a legislator for a long time like myself, I don't always remember the bill numbers, because I will have had, a bill number, the same number in a previous legislative year. And so I always remember them much better by the subject matter. I mean, for example, my police records bill, the classic example where I carried it last year. And last year, I believe it was maybe it's SB 776 this year. I'm getting so confused. No,
that's what we have staff for, right?
Right. And so it was the same bill, and I got it all the way to the finish line, just not across it. So the assembly passed it. I had the support in the Senate, but on the last night of session last year, we have a time certain. And because of the pandemic, we had to do everything slower. We had people that were remote participating. It just took longer. And we hit the midnight deadline, and we hadn't had a chance to take it up yet. So not to go too long, but so police records. California was a complete desert on this, and wrong in that we had a complete silence. If you compare the Public Records Act, for almost every other public employee, you can request and get information on most every aspect of that public employee's, their records. But not for law enforcement. For years, for over 40 years, nothing. So any misconduct by an officer, we were not privy to. And then in 2000 and I think it was 17, it might've been 18, I got through a bill that finally busted open that issue and allowed for public access to records around officer-involved shootings, officer dishonesty, meaning tampering with evidence or witness interference, and officer sexual misconduct. But we're not talking just sexual harassment. We're talking actual, real sexual assault on the job and such. So it's a very narrow set of categories. But the good news is that due to that law, for example, Oscar Grant's family finally was able to get the full records on the shooting that occurred at the BART station on that New Year's Eve. But what we know since then is that while that was a hard-fought bill, it really wasn't adequate. It really only gave such a minimal amount of information about our officers, when if we compare them to other public servants, public staff, we have much more information available. And when you think about how you really need community trust, law enforcement needs community trust to be successful. You improve community trust if you have some sunshine. So my new bill, which, like I said, is the repeat of last year's bill, my new bill would give us the ability to have public access to records on officers that have a pattern of biased or discriminatory behavior, officers who engaged in excessive force, so not just the shooting of a weapon, meaning not just discharging their gun, but other types of excessive force, and officers, and a little bit more around the dishonesty question. So I'm really excited about that bill. I think our law enforcement unions have now become neutral on it, which is great. They're not fighting it the way we have in the past. And so I'm very optimistic that it will pass. Now, the other bills that were mentioned, I had the great fortune of being appointed to a commission that was established a year ago that was reviewing California's penal code. And when I say the penal code, that's all the laws regarding what makes a crime and then what's the sentence related to a crime. And if you look, I mean, California up until recently was the poster child for mass incarceration. We had more people incarcerated per capita than anywhere, almost any, there was a very few places on the planet that had more than we did. And it was extraordinarily costly to us, and it's still costly. And it has generational impacts. And unfortunately, justice is not blind. Justice was very biased towards people of color, our Black and brown communities, so that you were much more likely to be stopped, arrested, and convicted if you were Black and brown, no matter what the crime was, than you are if you're white. And that's just an unfortunate reality, but it is the case. And it is partly why we have so many more Black and brown people as a proportion of the population incarcerated. While there is no data that shows that they have more criminal behavior than any of the rest of us, or I'll just say rest of us, we're all of Caucasians. So my bills that the questioner raised are two of them that came out of the Penal Code Review Commission. And they are, one of the reasons that we have so many Californians that are serving very long sentences in prison is because we have a whole host of things called enhancements. So you could engage in and not to try to minimize crime, but you could engage in a simple robbery. But at that robbery, later they said, oh, well, you have a gang affiliation. And your gang affiliation may be, you're not the member of the gang, you have a cousin who's the member of the gang. Or you had a weapon on you. Let's say you had a weapon, but you never used it, you didn't display it, it wasn't even loaded, let's say, for example, you could still get that enhancement. So there's this whole variety of enhancements that you could be added. Maybe you had a prior conviction 10 years ago, so they could add an enhancement to that. So you would have people that would have normally a base sentence of, say, 4 years, serving 25 years or longer because of these enhancements. So what my bill does is give the judge basically some parameters that, listen, doesn't wipe out the enhancements. It just says that in order to apply the enhancements, it has to meet these kinds of standards. So it's some more parameters so that we can have a little more fairness in the application of enhancements. And then the other bill that was referenced is, now we'll go back to robbery. The robbery charge is a felony, and it has up to 5 years in prison. Now, most of us don't think of, for example, I'll call simple shoplifting as robbery. We don't think of a shoplifting charge that should be getting a 5-year prison sentence. However, there is our robbery statute was written in the late 1880s. It has not been modified since. And now this is going to sound, and this is what's going to make my bill hard it's going to be tricky for me to get through, but the robbery statute says that if there was fear or force involved, that then it becomes robbery. Now, what is fear and force? So I'm the shoplifter. I'm running out of the store and I bump into a security guard, for example. Then there's force. And we've had situations where literally that's all that happened. And the person went from getting a misdemeanor theft charge to a robbery and then serving time in prison. Or maybe I yelled, in order to distract, but I yelled in such a way that a person felt in fear. That then all of a sudden, if the prosecutor can demonstrate the fear involved, then that becomes a robbery charge, which again is a felony and has these so many more years. So I tried to, and I'm working on the definitions of fear and force so that, because obviously if someone is really hurt, or if there's really, no, then it should be a robbery charge. But I'm trying to create a distinction between that notion of robbery and theft. And that's what that bill does. And was there one other bill that was mentioned in that question?
Right, the foster youth relative placement.
Okay. I need Jess. I need my staff on that one.
We can, I can work to unmute your staff and then, or they could post in the chat. But meantime, I have a couple of other questions.
Okay,
Actually,
great.
they're both regarding housing bills. So the first question, I'm just going to read them both.
I was going to ask about housing. So yes, let's hear it.
There you go. So the first one is, what does the senator see happening with housing bills this year generally? But the second question says, thank you, Senator Skinner, for co-authoring SB 827 and 50 and supporting SB 1120. As a lifelong resident of Alameda, how can I advocate and support overturning overturning exclusionary single-family home zoning statewide, including in Alameda, as we're seeing in Berkeley, San Jose, and Sacramento?
Well, thank you for that question. So, I referred to housing when I talked about our unsheltered people. And we just have a terrible supply crisis. And when you have a shortage of supply, the price goes up. It goes up. And when you think about the cost of living in Bay Area, it's very significantly high cost because of housing costs. And then, so number one, it's too expensive. And then there's not enough of it. And then you have lots of folks who either are on fixed incomes. So let's say I happen to be a senior, but I was not fortunate enough to ever buy a house. Or maybe I owned a house, but I lost it in the foreclosure. And so now I'm living on Social Security. And all of a sudden I cannot meet any rents. And, unfortunately, what we're finding is next thing you know, I'm living in my car. So that is, and why am I? Because we don't have enough housing that will allow then the price to go down. Now, a lot of people define it as, no, we just need affordable housing. Yes, we need affordable housing. But affordable housing, let's be real about who builds housing and where does the investment come from? Very little money is invested either by the federal government or the state. Maybe it should be different, but the reality is that housing is something that is paid for by the private sector. And so the private sector makes their investment, and we set up various rules to try to maximize the amount of affordable housing that the private sector builds. And this is now I'm setting aside from that which we 100% subsidized, which we still do some, but very little. But for the private sector to be able to build that affordable housing, they have to be able to have enough housing in their project to cover the cost of that affordable housing. And so we have bills like density bonus, and we have various other things to allow that. But with the construction costs and the long, lengthy time of permitting and all the rest of it that we created in the Bay Area and very much of California, the cost then per unit becomes so high that the investor can no longer cover the costs of that affordable unit. So the way we have developed the system is such that the cartoon Pogo, we have met the enemy and it is us. And then we take exclusionary zoning. That also is us. When we so restrict where we can build anything but a single family home, then we basically have made it extraordinarily expensive for housing and impossible almost. And we have pretty much increased the wealth of people that just had the good fortune at some point or another to buy a home. And we see it right now with the price of a single family home in all of our areas has just skyrocketed. And for example, I live in a 900 square foot home, all right, in the flatlands of Berkeley. And I have a large yard, but I don't even have a second unit. But the house next door to me, which is almost identical to mine, just sold for close to $1 million. Now, how can a 900 square foot home without even a second unit go for that amount of money? But that's what things are going for. And why? Just because, we happen to live in an area where nobody has allowed us to put any more density. So we got to stop those things. And I'm glad folks brought it up. It was unfortunate that the bill that was on the initiative that was on the ballot in Alameda County did not pass. And, I don't blame people for, I think we just have to have these conversations as to what are the implications of our restrictive zoning. And I think the other thing The Color of Law is a great book. Where did zoning, what's the origin of it? The origin of single family zone was for racial and economic exclusion. And even if that's not our purpose in protecting it today, it still has that consequence. It has a racial and economic exclusion. So very happy that there are some folks that appreciate these issues. And I think the more we talk about it, we can all become enlightened, because even I have only, it's only been in recent years that I've even understood all these things. So I don't blame people for us still being a difficult discussion. I understand it, but it's very important for us to engage on it. And
Thank you so
yeah,
much for that. Thank you, thank you. And I've read The Color of Law, which was very surprising to learn, but then Berkeley Council Member Lori Droste recently introduced the legislation that I think Berkeley City Council passed, that
yes,
Berkeley was the first city in the
right.
nation to impose single family
Zoning,
zoning,
yes.
single family only. So she was trying to help correct a historical wrong.
And we found in the historical record, it was explicitly to exclude Asian people, Black people. I mean, it was written, it's in the ordinance. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Got one follow-up question to
Okay.
that. This person says, when it comes to new housing, they've only ever seen mega developments. Is there a way to encourage smaller building projects? For instance, they would love to build a 2-plex or a 4-plex, but when the city makes land available for development, it's only for billion-dollar companies, not locals who want to work with local contractors.
Well, that's one of the reasons why. So my pro tem, Senator Atkins, has a bill that would allow for, up to 4-plexes in single family areas. And I think that when you look at it, so even parts of Alameda where the historic character was not just a single house, but a duplex, a 3-plex, a 4-plex on that lot where families shared, and maybe it was even intergenerational families. So that's a very typical housing characteristic. And then there's some yard and all that. And I think that that's a really good thing to move to. And for some of our folks that are like as you get older, and if you're living in a big house on a single family lot with a big yard, sure, there's ADUs, which mean the accessory dwellings, but those tend to be for 1 bedroom or a studio, and they're not necessarily family housing. Whereas maybe homeowner X could easily convert their house into a duplex or could have a 4-plex on their property, which would allow them to stay there and allow some families to also share and to share in all the benefits of that neighborhood, the schools in that neighborhood, the parks in that neighborhood. So I totally agree. We should open up to more duplexes, triplexes, and 4-plexes.
So if you were looking into your crystal ball, Senator, do you think Senator Atkins' bill has a pretty good chance of?
It's already passed the Senate floor. So we'll
Okay.
have to see how it's handled in the assembly.
Okay, good to know. And I will just to the last questioner, the reason that people have a difficult time doing things like building 4-plexes in Alameda is Article 26 of our charter, which, as the senator noted, unfortunately didn't pass in November. I also agree that we need more conversations. I don't think people fully understood the implications of those charter amendments, but it means that in Alameda, you cannot build on anything less than 2,000 square feet per housing unit, and you cannot build anything of higher density than a duplex unless you have a multifamily overlay that applies. But the multifamily overlay requires at least 10,000 square feet of a lot, at least 10,000 square feet, which is not a small lot. So we are unfortunately passing up opportunities where we could do residential over retail and build smaller units, affordable by design, tiny homes, all kinds of things, but not until either the state legislature comes along and says, you can't do that kind of restrictive zoning. I think it kind of does, but it may say it even more explicitly if some pending legislation gets all the way through. But no, we very much understand there's a definite link between the housing shortage and restrictions that we have in place in our very own city charter. So Sarah, I think with that, we're trying to keep the senator on schedule for her next meeting. It is 12:54. And for all of you in the audience on Zoom and on Facebook Live, I think you can understand why we are so fortunate to be represented represented by this amazing woman. By the way, happy Women's History Month, Senator Skinner. You've been making history, and we're just really so grateful for your hard work in the legislature, for understanding those issues that are really nearest and dearest and most important to all of us here in this one city, among others that you represent. So thank you so much for squeezing us into your busy day.
Well, Mayor Ashcroft, it's been a pleasure, and I really appreciate your leadership also. And since you brought up Women's History Month, I'm just so thrilled that we have a female vice president, and
Yay.
she's from our own area. She
That's
is
right.
our own, and I referenced, where I live in my house. 4 blocks just west of me was where Kamala grew up.
Was that her neighborhood?
Yes.
Aww.
And so on the day that the
inauguration?
vote, not the inauguration,
Oh, no.
It was the first certification of the vote, I decided, okay, well, maybe I'll just walk down the street and say, oh my goodness, there was a wonderful, fortunately, people were being very safe pandemic-wide. They, spread out, masks and everything, but just so excited with music and,
yes,
chalking the sidewalk and all. It was such a wonderful, wonderful experience. So that's great.
I smile every time I think about it. She just, yes. And as I say, when we talk about the COVID response, what a difference a new administration makes, and one that follows science. Vaccinations. We're going to be the vaccination nation. So thank you, Senator Skinner, and your staff, everyone who joined us here today. Remember, Alameda, whenever you leave your home, you put your mask on. Stay 6 feet. The senator would back me up. I was on a wonderful town hall you did late last year, and you had from UCSF this, was it Dr. Wachter? Or
yes, and Dr. Wachter, since you're bringing him up, I thought it was worth it to say, because I'm sure a lot of people watching have been vaccinated. And not all, of course, but will hopefully be very soon.
Yes.
But he just put out something, and that was also in the San Francisco Chronicle, about what you can and can't do once you're vaccinated. So the thing to know is, yes, you are safer when you're vaccinated, but no, do not let your guard down. Still wear your mask, still keep your social distance, don't have indoor parties. And because you don't want to, you may be an asymptomatic spreader. We don't fully understand that yet. And you really don't, the whole benefit of the vaccination is to get this spread down. That's what we're trying to do for everybody. So even those of us who are vaccinated, do the right thing, follow all the public health guidelines.
You heard it from the senator, everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you, all of you. Thank you to Sarah for making this happen. Let's give her a big round of applause.
Thank you, everyone. Great to see you, Senator.
Lovely to have you. Take care, everyone. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.